Zina Huntington, the fourth spiritual wife of Joseph Smith, is one of the best documented wives. She kept a diary and wrote a number of autobiographical sketches.
Zina was born on January 31st, 1821, in Jefferson County, New York.
Keep in mind that Joseph was born in 1805.
Zina had 7 older siblings. 2 of them died before she was born, and she had 2 younger siblings. Zina grew up in a large story-and-a-half farmhouse with a dairy behind it, and 200 acres of farm surrounding it. Her mother taught her how to spin and weave wool and sew clothes. She once wrote, "I used to muse, while watching the consuming bark log in our old-fashioned fireplaces, why I could not have been born in a day when something was going on in the nations of the earth. Not that I wished to see distress, but some enterprise beyond that Sabbath meeting schools. My relatives were mostly close by, as all I ever anticipated to see."
This makes me think of the scene from Beauty and the Beast. And Zina got adventure all right.
In 1831, Zina's father decided to study the Bible more fully. He came to realize that none of the churches were right, because none of them had prophets, apostles, or spiritual gifts. When her father heard the word prophet, he was at once anxious to meet Joseph Smith. Because of his farm duties, her father William was unable to go, but his neighbor went and visited Joseph and brought back a Book of Mormon. Before even reading the book, Zina felt deeply impressed that the book was true. She wrote, "I saw the Book of Mormon, that strange new book lying on the windowsill of our sitting room. I went up to the window, picked it up, and the sweet influence of the Holy Spirit accompanied it to such an extent that I pressed it to my bosom in a rapture of delight, murmuring as I did so, 'This is the truth, truth, truth.'"
Way to use the scientific method, Zina.
Zina remembers seeing Joseph for the first time. He was 6 feet, light auburn hair, and a heavy nose, blue eyes, the eyeballs full and round, rather long-favored when he was filled with the spirit of revelation or inspiration. To talk to the saints, his countenance would look clear and bright. In 1839, much of the family became ill, almost to the point of death. Zina's mother passed away on July 8th. Zina recalls that Joseph and his adopted daughter, Julia, tended to them in their sickness. Eventually, Joseph told them that if they remained in their home, they would all die. Joseph offered for them to stay at his house.
Ironically, while she was staying with the Smiths, Zina met a man named Henry Jacobs. He was 23, handsome, and a returned missionary. After Zina recovered, she moved in with her brother Dimmick, and she and Henry started courting. Also remember that this is one of the patterns, that Joseph would often live with these women before he married these women. During 1840, Joseph taught Zina about polygamy, but because Zina was in love with Henry Jacobs, and polygamy was not the Christian way, and the fact that Joseph was already a married man, 19-year-old Zina turned down Joseph Smith. I imagine she felt very conflicted in turning down the prophet of God.
In early 1841, Zina made her decision, and that she would marry Henry. According to family tradition, as the day of marriage approached, Henry and/or Zina asked Joseph to perform the marriage, and he agreed. On March 7th, Henry and Zina, with friends and family, arrived at the place designated for the marriage, but Smith did not appear. Instead, they turned to John C. Bennett, mayor of Nauvoo, and asked him to officiate. Zina must have felt relieved that she had avoided a polygamous union with Joseph. According to family tradition, she and Henry saw Joseph soon after the marriage, and asked him why he had not come. He told them that the Lord had made it known to him she was to be his celestial wife. Joseph told her that God had commanded him to marry her. He apparently told them that they could continue living together as husband and wife, which was another pattern whenever Joseph married already married women. According to tradition, Henry accepted this, but Zina struggled. In October, Joseph sent Dimmick, Zina's brother, to send a message to Zina. The message was that an angel with a drawn sword had stood over Joseph, and told him that if he did not establish polygamy, he would lose his position and his life. Zina finally agreed to become a polygamous wife to the prophet. She records the marriage as taking place October 27, 1841. Zina was 7 months pregnant with Henry's son.
And again, we see the pattern of Joseph using a male intermediary.
Although Zina recorded later that the reason for her marriage to Joseph was because "I was married to Mr. Jacobs, but the marriage was unhappy, and we parted." This hardly seems accurate, as she had married Henry just 7 months earlier. Additionally, her journals and his letters to her indicate a very different reality for the relationship between Zina and Henry. While there is no formal record of a sexual relationship with Zina, Joseph sent Henry on a number of missions that would put him out of the way for such relationship to take place. 2 weeks after their first son, Zebulon, was born, Henry was sent on a mission to Chicago. Joseph sent him personally, and a year later, in 1843, Henry was sent on another mission. While there, his companion John D. Lee records that Henry would brag about Zina and almost worship her. Later that year, Henry was sent on another mission to western New York, and he was sent on another mission to Tennessee in early 1844. After Joseph Smith's death, Brigham Young promised Zina that if she married him, she would have a higher glory in the celestial kingdom.
Although it is very unclear why being sealed to Brigham for time was somehow better than being sealed to Joseph for time and eternity. Brigham never explained.
After his sealing to the new prophet, Brigham sent Henry on 3 additional missions. While he was gone, Brigham lived openly with Zina as his wife in winter quarters. While Henry was serving his mission, he wrote beautiful and romantic letters to Zina. He even wrote in one of them that Zina should tell Brigham that, "I have no feelings against him, nor never had. All is right according to the law of the celestial kingdom of our God Joseph." After he returned from his mission, he went with his companion Oliver Huntington, Zina's brother, to visit his wife Mary, who had recently received a letter from Zina. Zina expressed in the letter that she was no longer married to Henry, and that she was now only Brigham's wife. Henry eventually married a woman named Aseneth Babcock, but he seems to still have continued to love Zina. They ended up traveling west with the saints. Henry wrote letters to Zina, which she preserved, but never got any letters in return. Family tradition tells us that Henry was eventually excommunicated because he proceeded to try to win Zina back. In her diary, Zina continued to record Henry's birthday for years after they were separated. Henry eventually divorced Aseneth, married 2 other women, and eventually married Sarah Taylor in 1860.
Not polygamously, he just kept getting divorces.
Sometime in all of this, Henry left Utah, but returned just before he passed away and reportedly lived in a bedroom of Zina's house and was cared for by a hired woman. Zina may not have been living there, as she often rented out the house. Henry died on August 1st of 1886 and was buried in his temple clothes in Salt Lake City. Like many of the wives, Zina struggled with polygamy, not in belief, but in being. Zina had to work to provide for herself. She relied on her siblings to help her in day-to-day life. She essentially raised her children alone. After her 2 sons with Henry, she had a daughter with Brigham, named Zina, and then afterwards adopted 4 of Brigham's children after their own mother passed away.
Zina once recorded that a polygamous wife must regard her husband with indifference, and with no other feeling than that of reverence. For love we regard as a false sentiment, a feeling which should have no existence in polygamy.